Hi, everyone, and welcome to our event on building global biotech startups. I'm Julie with IndieBio. I'm joined by CEO of BioFeyn, Timothy Boulay, and Jonny Everett, who is here representing Entrepreneur First. We'd like to start with a round robin introduction of the programs that we are here, program and company that we are here representing today. So I'm going to start by passing the mic over to my colleague, Jonny, to introduce Entrepreneur First and the program that he's running over in Paris.
Thanks, Julie, and good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. Nice to be here. Julie said my name's Jonny. I work for Entrepreneur First Paris. Entrepreneur First is what we call a talent investor, meaning that you arrive as an individual, pre-team and pre-idea, and you leave, hopefully as an EF-funded company 3 months later, and we then support you for another 6 months to hopefully get your first external investment as seed. We've done this a lot. So we have six offices globally across Asia, Europe, and North America. And the portfolio now is worth over $2 billion and backed by people like Reid Hoffman and Peter Thiel. And Timmy is one of the portfolio companies that we managed to spin out together in Paris, thanks to his intelligence and diligence and hard work and all those other good things. So if you're interested in building biotech and you're in one of our locations, EF could be a great option for you to look at. But happy to talk more about the program as we go on, Julie.
Excellent. And so I'm going to take the next introduction for IndieBio before passing it over to Timmy. I am Julie Wolfe. I'm the communications director at IndieBio's new office here in New York. I do have a science background. I'm a microbiologist, and so was thrilled when IndieBio opened its second location, with the first one being in San Francisco, where it's been in operations for about 6 years now. Now, IndieBio works specifically with biotech companies, and biotech companies to IndieBio means any company that is taking some sort of biological engineering approach to create a solution to some of the largest problems facing human and planetary health. And so that means not only companies that might be a traditional biopharma or diagnostic, but people who are in biomaterials, ag tech, computational biology, all types of different companies. We have so far worked with over 150 companies through IndieBio, but IndieBio is, I should mention, part of a larger family of accelerators backed by the VC firm SOSV. Now, our program runs twice a year for 4 months. It's a very mentor-intensive, customer-intensive, and milestone-driven program. And during this program, in exchange for equity within the company, we provide $250,000, this mentor-driven program. And importantly for biotech, we provide rent-free lab space, which can be vital to move your technology forward. We set milestones with our companies at the beginning of the program. We can talk about what those might look like in the case of Timmy and BioFeyn. And what those milestones are meant to do is to make a company more investable as they exit. Our company, after 4 months, our companies will participate in Demo Day to highlight the progress they've been able to make on both the technical and business sides of their companies. And this will hopefully bring on lots of investor interest to help the companies continue in this same trajectory. Can talk a little bit more about what the program entails, but I think this is a good opportunity for me to hand it over to Timmy to introduce BioFeyn.
Thanks. I'm not sure what the orientation is on your screen, but I'm nestled here in between my two investors, so I've got to make this good. So yeah, as Julie said, I'm the CEO of BioFeyn. We are a company that is producing nanotechnologies for aquaculture, enhancing feed and marine ingredients. We're truly a planetary health company. We're taking this science directly from the world of human biomedicine and applying it to aquaculture to enhance the nutrient of fish, both for fish health and environmental health, but also for human health. I don't know how much you want me to go into this, Julie, but maybe I'll stop there. We've got a website if you want to check it out, www.biofeyn.com, or we're splattered on the IndieBio as well as the EF homepage.
Yeah, that's really a great way to kind of kick everything off with introductions. And I think now I'm going to sit back and let Jonny and Timmy talk a little bit more about the formation and the initial steps in forming a company through the EF program.
Sure. So Timmy, you joined our PA3 program, which was in October, I believe, right? 2019. So we run programs twice a year. So you joined as one of approximately 60 other individual founders looking to come and join and start a company. And before that, you were kind of in a big corporate environment doing lots of high flying type jobs. What was the decision for you to A, step into entrepreneurship, and B, why did you feel like EF was the best place to take that first step?
Yeah, great questions. So I spent 7 years working at the World Bank, coordinating portfolios, in fact, in planetary health, the interactions between animal health, human health, and then more specifically on the investment side of that, working with developing countries, giving out cash. And through the course of this career, encountered a lot of problems, saw a lot of the work that wasn't being done, seeing a great need for innovation. And then combined with challenges in environmental health and human health, thought, all right, well, there's really some work to be done. And I wasn't convinced that it was my skill set to be sitting on the side of a global financing institution giving out cash. And I wanted to get my hands dirty and get on the front lines. And for that meant having a company and starting something. And so there are ways to go about this. And I thought, well, maybe I could have an NGO, or maybe I could start something within another entity. But really decided that if I wanted to make an impact in the way that I was interested in, that it made sense to have a startup and to have my own company. And so spent a good period of time, about a year, poking around, meeting with researchers and entrepreneurs, trying to identify best pathways forward, what kind of company we wanted to create, where we wanted to do it. And I ended up with EF. And the reason was that EF provides this platform for meeting co-founders and putting together companies. So I had done a lot of entrepreneurship within my institution, but it's very different to have your own company. You've got to do everything from, managing finances to writing the corporate narrative. And in the case of a biotech, it's setting up and running a lab, which IndieBio has been tremendously useful with. And we can talk about that later. But I ended up with Entrepreneur First because really I needed a co-founder and I needed some initial finance to kick this off. And the cash that EF provides, it's not a ton, it's $100,000, but it is useful to catalyze other financial relationships, to get further investment behind the company, and to give budding entrepreneurs a sense of orientation to the space.
And can you maybe tell us, so what was that 3 months like for you in terms of the experience? So how did that process map for you from arriving to leaving as BioFeyn? What were the key, elements of that journey that maybe were expected, unexpected? And then I've got one more question for you once you've answered that on the EF side.
Yeah, great. So it was very intense. It was, I believe, to sort of walk people through the program, you start off with this kickoff day. And so you meet everybody. There are these 59 other entrepreneurs or potential entrepreneurs, and you just start marinating and see who you might have a match with in terms of skill set, in terms of personality, and so on. And then following that, you go through this period where you are quickly meeting with people, trying to suss out company ideas and form partnerships, and where you might be able to, what nuggets you might be able to build a company around. And during that process, there's a lot of trial and error. There's a lot of feedback. There's a lot of learning. We had lectures from people that are experienced in entrepreneurship. Jonny, you gave a number of these a few times a week. EF team provided a real kick in the pants too, for certain areas where we needed to work. I didn't go to business school. I went to medical school and environmental school. So this was very useful for me to understand the basics of venture finance and cap tables, and how to make customer calls and putting together CRMs. Things like this that I knew about vaguely, because I've sort of listened to some startup podcasts and I've got friends that have worked in this space. But it's very different to be doing it on your own. So it was a very intense period. And I mean, I would say that, the intensity has not really let down, now that we're a year plus into this process, we're still on 90 to 120 hour work weeks trying to get this sorted out. But EF was really the start to that. And again, it was an excellent orientation to the world of entrepreneurship, and how you start a company.
Amazing. And I just wanted to try and crystallize. So if we have biotech or future biotech founders on this call thinking of making that jump, whether they do it in the context of a program like EF, or where they form and go to an IndieBio or not, what are some of the things that in that first like inception phase, going from idea to initial company formation, that they should be cognizant of that you wish you'd have known at that particular point in time?
Biotech company building is very different than other kinds of company building. The reasons for that are you're limited by biological constraints. You need to do laboratory tests. You need to do animal testing sometimes. There's regulatory approval. Fundamentally, there's a different time scale and finance requirement for biotech companies versus other tech companies. And so we didn't understand this going in. And I mean, to be honest, I think it was a bit of a journey with EF too. A lot of the EF staff were oriented towards other kinds of tech companies. And so we had to figure this out together. I know that EF is much better positioned in that regard now. But it took us a while to figure this out. And ultimately, it was one of the reasons that we ended up incubating with IndieBio as well, because we wanted to marinate in the biotech startup space, because there are different needs. Arranging a lab is not a trivial thing. A lot of biotech companies spin out from universities, which is a great way to start because you're already oriented within a laboratory and you have the kinds of supplier partnerships that you need to get your reagents and so forth. But if you're not coming from a university, you need to arrange that. And it is non-trivial because you've got to deal with all the legal issues around setting up a laboratory. And then there's IP dimensions too. Biotech is a very IP heavy industry. And so you need to have a good sense of what is going to fly. And then also be willing to go up against these technology transfer departments within universities or these CROs or wherever else, or these big companies you're forming partnerships with to work it out to ensure that you have a favorable arrangement for your company.
Okay, super clear. I just wanted to pivot slightly, Timmy. So you're obviously, well, not obviously, but in case you haven't guessed, you're American. You were in Paris, so you joined the Paris cohort. IndieBio started life as a French company. Sorry, not IndieBio. BioFeyn started life as a French company. I'm getting my names mixed up here. You then went into IndieBio, which is an American, or in the American side of that cohort program, and you're back in the US at the moment, flicking between the two. Talk to us a bit about how you see, I guess, France or Europe more broadly versus the US, and what does that trade-off look like? What are the pros and the cons when it comes to building biotech?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I do just quickly before that, I want to address the size of my coffee cup. We were just saying that with Julie and Josh, it's a giant coffee cup. It's to maintain my caffeine requirement. I'm not actually that small. I'm not a huge guy, but I'm not that small. So yeah. So right, just sucking down the caffeine. Okay, so differences between the European ecosystem and the American ecosystem. My story was a bit complicated. I ended up in France because I was interested in working not specifically with the French startup ecosystem, but because I was there to understand more about marine science. There's a very rich history of ocean science, oceanography in France, and there's some interesting biotech stuff that's happening that's a bit different than the United States. And so for that reason, I stayed in France. But also there were interesting government stimulation programs. Macron has put in place for startups, and France is indeed becoming a better place for startup hubs. I don't know if you in the audience are familiar with where Entrepreneur First is based, but it's at a place called Station F, which is Europe's largest startup campus. And so you've got hundreds, thousands of startups there. And so this was a really positive dimension of working out of Paris, because there was opportunity to work with these other entrepreneurs. There were venture firms based in this space, a lot of other startup ecosystem service companies as well. So that was very useful. I will say, however, we started this company as a French entity, which was the place that we needed to start, because we were in France and we had funding coming through a French entity. But for me as an American, it proved difficult. So I speak French, but the degree to which you need to speak French to read legal documents and understand finance documents, these are difficult in one's native language, let alone a second language. And so that posed problems. But, we were able to get some good lawyers and work through it and get everything up and running. And then we started to poke around the investment scene. And the investment scene is different. There are different actors in France and in the EU and in the UK versus the United States. Some investors will only invest in European companies, some only in American companies, some only in British companies. And for us, for what we were doing, it made the most sense to become an American entity, both in terms of simplification of the bureaucracy, which again is something I think it's a bit more manageable for somebody that's native to the country, but also in terms of the kinds of investments we're looking to onboard. It was something that investors were more comfortable with, to be able to put cash into a Delaware C Corp versus a French SAS. So I think it's an important consideration when people are deciding where to base themselves. And it's not something that's easy to undo. It took us, tens of thousands of dollars basically to move the company main entity from Europe to the United States. We still have a subsidiary in France, which we'll probably maintain for some while, because there are advantages to that in terms of customer base and grant funding and so on. But it was a non-trivial process to set up a Delaware C Corp that met the needs and the interests of our investors as well. And that's going to be an expensive process at any time that you do it within the company. In the life of the company, I think that we did it about as cheaply as we could because we were so early on. But once you start establishing intellectual property and you have salaried employees, it becomes very complex.
I'd like to interject here and say that thank you, Timmy, for saying that this is something that you decided on your own, because I know that IndieBio was happy to work with a French company. We are happy to work with companies who are based all around the world. And if you look at the IndieBio portfolio, you'll see that the founders that we've worked with have started companies and built companies in the place where they've been, where they initially incorporated. And I think that that's important in terms of the network and just eligibility to apply for the IndieBio program. We don't want anyone to think that we're trying to strong arm companies to become American companies. And I guess that brings up a question in my mind that I'm not sure with the EF program, and that is eligibility and the founders that you're working with, Jonny, where you are recruiting from and what the requirements are in terms of not only background and certain characteristics, but like where are they living? Oh, yeah, and sorry, I want to address just one of these questions that's been put into the chat, and that is the name of the big startup campus that you referenced there, Timmy. I believe that was Station F. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So station like a train station, and F for Freddie. Yeah. Or EF, F for EF. That was a missed opportunity, wasn't it?
Of course.
Yeah, great question. So, I mean, EF has 6 locations. So we have London, Paris, Berlin, Bangalore, Singapore, and Toronto. So 6 locations globally. And so we basically encourage you to apply to your nearest site or to wherever you feel you have the strongest ties to that particular country. So most of the people that apply will have some sort of visa for that particular country already in place. In certain circumstances they won't, but generally they will. And most of the time they'll apply to their nearest site. However, that still means we get a diverse group of nationalities. For example, people here in Paris might have been studying but come from Mexico. We have quite a lot of people from there quite often, America in Timmy's case. So even though those sites are localized, you can expect quite an international pool. And then we recruit a cohort every 6 months. So in Europe and Toronto, it's every April and October. So next one coming up in April to start. And in that 60, approximately, I'd say 60% of those people will be PhD level technical people in different domains, from artificial intelligence to biotech to chemistry to physics to material science, lots of different things, all deep tech. And then there'll be another batch of what we call kind of catalysts. So maybe technical or non-technical, but these are people more likely to be CEO type profiles, maybe previous entrepreneurs, previous consultants, and even in some cases, direct graduates that are exceptional. And then a small percentage of what we call domain experts. So people that have a deep knowledge of a particular industry or market that can bring that to bear within the program. So in terms of who we look for, one of the things we're very bullish on is early founders. So people who are looking for a way to fast forward their career, basically. So if you feel like you're exceptional and you don't want to have to kind of climb the corporate ladder and do all this stuff before you start a startup, then EF can be a great place for you. And equally, if like Timmy, you have an amazing track record, an amazing career, and you want to transition into a startup, EF can also be a great platform for you. So really what we look for is personal exceptionalism and the kind of characteristics that we would expect to see hopefully in future entrepreneurs, I would hope. But Julie, I know we talked a lot about EF and we kind of got to the point of Timmy's EF journey, well, at least some of it. I'd love to flip the switch and hear about how Timmy arrived at IndieBio and what was in store for BioFeyn there.
Yeah, so Timmy I remember very well, actually, Timmy's interview, because we were just starting to enter COVID times. And this is something that I think both programs and all people around the world are dealing with, is how to have these types of relationships in a virtual world. But I remember, because Timmy clearly has a very friendly and charming personality and is very smart and passionate about ocean health. And he came in with this wonderful idea to take a technology that had already been developed for humans and apply it for a completely novel application and a new product. But that product was not, the part where IndieBio really came into play was with some of this customer discovery, because maybe you can talk a little more about what your product is, Timmy. I don't want to, give away the ending when it's your punchline, and talk about how you had multiple different opportunities to use this in different types of farmed animals.
Yeah, that's great. So, we've certainly been on a journey over the past 18 months or so with this, and where we started is very different than where we are now. And you hear about pivots all the time in the startup world. And before I started on this process, I thought a pivot was something where you're going here and then you completely change and do something else. And it's not exactly like that, or it hasn't been for us. There have been a lot of micro pivots instead of changing and moving path and developing product ideas and customer base as we have moved along. And so when we started at EF, indeed, we were still working on this, where we started with this concept of using nanoencapsulation as a delivery mechanism for medicines and nutrients in farmed animals. And where we had started was we were focusing on shrimp. And the reason was that shrimp is this major global market, but it's plagued with problems, with environmental problems, with animal health problems. And we thought that we could make an impact by reducing the amount of, say, antibiotics that are used in the space and increasing the efficacy of compounds that are added to shrimp aquaculture to improve animal health. But as we progressed on with the company, and as we started working more with IndieBio, and this was about, I would say, 6 months into our process with the company when we started working with IndieBio, to give you some context, we started to think more differently about the customer base and the kinds of problems that we were solving for. And so indeed, while there were these problems in shrimp aquaculture, there were rampant problems throughout the rest of aquaculture. And we thought, all right, how do we really form a business about this? And what is going to get us to market fast? And where is the money? Because that's an important consideration. I come from the world of science and the world of development banks, but you're not really thinking about where the money is because you're giving it out. So it's a different perspective. And so we wanted to make sure that we could lock in the success of the company. And so to do that, we needed to position ourselves in a way where we could get cash. And so part of that was shifting our market. And so we're now focused on salmon. And the reason is that salmon is it's a market that's much more geographically parameterized. You've got most of salmon farming happening at the moment in Norway. There's some coming online in the United States, in Canada, Ireland, Iceland, a few other places. But that's very different than the shrimp market. Largely, this is happening in Asia and in South America. The kinds of folks that are shrimp farmers are very different than the folks that are salmon farmers. You may have hundreds of thousands of shrimp farmers throughout Asia. That's not the case in Norway. You've got a few dozen farms that are really producing most of the world's salmon. And so in terms of customer access, it made more sense to go with salmon, as well as the kinds of margins that are associated with this space, very high margins associated with premium salmon. So, as you can hear me talking, we're shifting away from the science and looking more at numbers and spreadsheets and how we can position ourselves to make cash. That being said, we did make a scientific shift as well. And so instead of focusing on the delivery of medicines, we shifted into the delivery of nutrients. And that was also a business decision. Ultimately, we see that, we can have impact in the medicinal and veterinary health space. But to get started, to get up and running, we're focusing on nutrients because there are lower regulatory barriers. This is super critical in the world of biotech. If you're doing drug delivery for fish, or if you're doing literally anything else in the space, you've got to be conscious of these because you're putting stuff into humans or into animals or in the environment. And so it was a much faster pathway for us to market, to focus on nutrients than it was on medicines, and cheaper, much cheaper.
Yes, cheaper as well. Can you talk how customer discovery along the entire supply chain kind of informed your decision here? And as well as, I was going to ask about the difference between what your end product was, but you don't have to divulge exactly what it is, but there are many different nutrients that people are looking for. How do you decide what that go-to-market product is going to be using customer conversations?
Yeah, so I would say that we had a good kickoff with the customer discovery at EF. This is something that EF is super aggressive on. And we would walk into our weekly meeting with Jonny, and he'd get up at the front of the room and yell at us. If we hadn't met our quota of customers that we'd reached out to and calls that we'd had.
Not yell. Nicely yell.
Encourage.
Chastise, perhaps. Yeah, encourage. I like that. Yeah.
Right.
Encourage. Motivate. Yes.
That's right. Motivate. Exactly. And the truth is that, like, if you're starting a company from scratch, you need to do this customer exploration. It's not like any one of us was coming from a particular field where we had hundreds and thousands of embedded context. I mean, that is somewhat the case a little bit. But even so, if you're doing exploration for your particular product, you need to re-talk to these customers. And so you need to, you place a heavy emphasis on reaching out and discussing with people. This, was complicated during COVID. So we started this process by, cold calling folks, which nobody likes to do, reaching out through contacts, LinkedIn requests, emails, and so on. And you get a mixed results with that, right? And you learn how to frame your customer introductions so you get better responses. You can get the kinds of information and data that you need. We also looked to consumer reports and surveys. There's a number of companies out there that survey others in the industry. Conferences also do a lot of surveying of customers, and so they're good resources to go and find companies that you want to be talking to. And you can use that as baseline data to then go out and discover customers further. And so we, in a perfect world, we would have gone to conferences. We would have gone and met some of these people, but with COVID, you can't do that. And this online conference situation is very different. And you're not meeting people standing around a bar having a gin and tonic. And so you've got to recalibrate. It gets very tiresome, to like go through and have Zoom calls and just constantly be reaching out to people electronically. But that being said, it's got to be done. So we did this all throughout EF, and then throughout IndieBio as well. When we got to IndieBio, we became more strategic about it. And we at this point we had a bit of a base of customers built up who we could rely on to connect us with other types of customers, to do more discovery as we continued to build up our network. And by this point too, we had a website, so we had a survey online. We were getting more savvy with our communication software, and we were able to reach out to people this way. And so just using this multiplicity of tools. Some of the companies in the cohorts, they had interns, which we did not have. I wish we had, because it would be really useful to rely on some other brains to put together some of these pieces and do basic analysis. Whereas for us, it was just us doing everything. So I would say that's like a pro tip. If you guys can, if you're in a university area, get some interns to help you out or something. But this continues to this day. Customer discovery and engagement is something that is the core part of our any business. And so it's something that we're always doing,
And in terms of access to people, you're working with people in Norway, some of the salmon farmers, right? You're working with producers, feed producers who might be either in the US, North America, or Europe. This session is really supposed to talk about the international relationships that people are able to form. So I guess maybe I'd like to ask how you found this, especially in this Zoom time when people are perhaps more available, but perhaps less engaged because of Zoom. Timmy, what was your experience there?
Yeah, it's, I was just on a run this morning listening to First Aid Kit, Silver Lining. Anybody know that song? You know, and the Scandinavian band. You know, it's really true. And I think the silver lining in this particular COVID experience is that it has, in some ways, lowered the barriers for engagement with partners who are far away, because there's no longer an expectation that you're going to show up and talk to them and buy them lunch. You know, now the expectation is that you're going to send them an email and have a Zoom conversation. So, you know, I think that has been, it's been helpful. And it's, I mean, I would really say that's basically it. You know, it's a bummer not to have conferences and not to be able to hop on a plane and go meet salmon farmers, but there's still opportunity in this new reality.
Yeah. Now we're getting a number of questions about the application process for both of the programs. So I don't know if we want to address those right now or save them for the end, but one of them is specific for you, Timmy. They ask what was it that set Timmy's EF application, or any typical application, I guess you could say, apart to make a candidate, particularly someone who's got that entrepreneurial spirit, but might not yet have their final product or their company incorporated yet. So Jonny, maybe you want to talk about that application, as well as there was a question about the timing. I think that you touched on that, but maybe you want to emphasize that again.
Sure. Timmy, am I right to share the full story of your EF application journey?
Please, by all means. Just get another cup of coffee.
Well, so my understanding is Timmy actually applied before I joined, so for the PA2 cohort, and we actually rejected him at that particular time. And then Timmy came back again for the PA3 cohort, and we took him that time. It seems like it was a good decision, I think. I mean, I think one of the things that we will have seen is that he's come back again, right? And that in and of itself is one of the qualities that you're going to need, is some level of resilience to adverse events, because whether it's COVID or whether it's something else, you're going to get punched in the mouth a lot when you build a startup. And so if you come back from your first punch in the mouth, then that's a good sign. I think the other thing, obviously, from our point of view, is it was very interesting to have someone that was deep and long on such a specific area. And whilst Timmy says he doesn't have a business background, which I'm not going to say you do if you don't feel like you do, you were still engaged on kind of the funding, the economic side of the equation, as well as having the medical doctor training. So quite an interesting mix of skills that you don't see every day. And often those kinds of individuals are the types of people that have quite unique insights and quite a unique take that is hard to acquire through bedtime reading. So when you're entering these kind of markets, I don't think many people would even think about what are farmed fish being fed. It's never crossed my mind, I can tell you that much for free, before I met Timmy. So I think sometimes those profiles are extra interesting because they tend to go and look in places based on everything they know that you just would never think to, you know, that's just not a rock you would generally go and try and turn over if you weren't aware of that before. So I think one of the key things to try and make this more applicable for everyone is, what is it that you know? What is it that you have done? What is it that you can demonstrate that gives us something exciting to think about the potential of working with you? What are some things that you have a strong opinion on? Maybe that other people don't also agree on. They're always interesting. And what have you also done throughout your career, however long or short, that demonstrates a continued performance and attempt to try and be in kind of the top 1% of your peer group. So even with Timmy, who's had a very illustrious career, he'd clearly done a number of changes throughout that journey, whether it was internally at the World Bank, whether it's the fact he went to, you have 2 doctorates, Timmy, is that right?
No, I got 1 doctorate and 3 masters. So.
Okay. So whether you have 1 doctorate and 3 masters from some of the top schools in the world, you know, these are all proxies for us understanding that this isn't someone who's just, you know, joined a company and sat in the same role and slowly climbed up the ladder for X number of years. This is someone who's clearly looking to push themselves at every corner. So I would think about what's your basically personal exceptionalism. in the context of other very, very skilled and ambitious people, which is the key. So it's not about necessarily your friendship group as much as it is about who's the top 1% and what are you doing that's exciting compared to them.
And so I'm guessing that we have a number of excited entrepreneurs in the audience because we are getting a number of questions. I'm going to ask one more question about the EF program and then give some details about the IndieBio program. And that's about the commitment. Is this a full-time program where people need to leave their job to really commit to being this entrepreneur and forming a startup, Jonny?
Yes, is the answer to that. So the EF program is a minimum 3-month full-time commitment. You receive a stipend during that period. So in France, you get 2,000 euros a month for the 3 months, paid regardless of what happens, pretty much, as long as you don't quit the program. And through that program cycle of 3 months, you will get all the modules, the support, et cetera, that Timmy mentioned. And ultimately, at the end of that, you will pitch to our investment committee. And if successful, you'll get 80,000 pounds, 90,000 euros for 10% of your company, as well as the ongoing support that you get being part of the EF portfolio leading up to demo day, which I'm sure maybe Timmy can share some details on later. But yes, it is a full-time commitment. I don't know if you remember earlier, Timmy mentioning he's working 90, 120 hours. I don't condone that in any way. Work-life balance, number one. But being a startup founder does require some really intensive sprints. And EF is definitely one of those intensive sprints. And I do not think that anyone would be able to have any chance of being successful as a founder, and specifically in a program like EF, if you weren't fully focused on it, fully committed, 100%. And the last thing I'll just share as a personal anecdote is I think that when you don't have a plan B, you work a lot harder to make plan A work. So I would encourage you not to do a sabbatical or anything like this. I would encourage you to cut the rope, jump. And the worst thing is that you'll have had an amazing experience, met some amazing people, and definitely grown as a person and be ready to do something amazing next, even if it's not a startup. Excellent answer.
And I think one of the reasons why it's lovely to be sharing a stage with you, Jonny, is because our programs are quite complementary. We think similarly about founders, but the requirements to participate are a little bit different with IndieBio, in that we do expect that there is, if not a company incorporated, almost incorporated. Like we are happy to talk with entrepreneurs at any stages, but we do work with companies that are actually formed, and we work with companies that are that have a founding team. That team is something that I know is very important to EF, and it's also very important to IndieBio. There's a question here about the stage of companies prior to applying. I assume this is for IndieBio, but just want to say we work with companies all along the spectrum. Some have never taken investment before. Some have done friends and family rounds. Some have raised small rounds of perhaps a convertible note, but generally we're happy to work with all types of companies. And I think for more details on both EF and IndieBio, we did provide those links down below. If you're on the event page, by all means, check those out and get in touch with us if you have more specific questions. So with that, I thought maybe we could broaden to talk a little bit more about the differences in ecosystem between Paris, France, and the European biotech scene, and New York, San Francisco, Boston, the American biotech scene. And one of the questions that we were batting around as we were thinking about this event was what is good? What does good look like in biotech? And I loved this question because you can make it specific to those applications, but you can also make it specific to the ecosystem in terms of what the technologies are that are coming out of the spaces, that are coming out of the institutions that are local to the spaces, and just what the trends are in terms of moving different technologies forward. I wonder if, just kind of with that as a preamble, if either Timmy or Jonny would like to have the first bat at what this good in biotech book means to either a new biotech startup or to a European incubator. Sorry, I lost the word for a second. Incubator. Do you consider yourselves an incubator or an accelerator program, Jonny?
I mean, neither really. We consider ourselves what we call a talent investor, simply because the incubators and accelerators kind of both assume some sort of company, and obviously we're pre-company, pre-team, pre-idea, so we're even further along the spectrum. I mean, Timmy, feel free to jump in with your 2 cents. I'm happy to give you a view on what I've seen since I've been working with EF in Paris and France specifically, if that's the context of Europe, remains to be seen. I think what was interesting, we were talking about this before the meeting kicked off, is I think in EF's portfolio in Europe at least, London has always been quite long on bio. So we've always seen a lot of our bio companies come from the London cohort. Over the last 3 cohorts, from Timmy onwards and previous to as well, we've started to see more and more applications from people who are looking to launch in bio and who want to work in bio. I'm not sure on why. I think part of it is an ecosystem thing. I think if you're someone who wants to work in that space, it is a hard space to launch in, and it's a hard space to know how to launch in. And so I think programs, whether it's like EF or IndieBio, I think are especially important for the harder technical problems that you're going to face in bio, and for like, how do you find a co-founder that's a complementary fit and build a biotech company is kind of a difficult question if you're not in that space on both sides of the table already. So I think that as programs sit in ecosystems, I think things like biotech, deep tech, but specifically bio in our case today, you see more and more founders come in with amazing technology and ideas because they know they want to launch this into a company, they want to have impact, they want to use their technology. The question is, how do they do that? And specifically in France, where the university spin-out programs are just not that effective at the moment, EF's a great home for people to do that instead. Even in London, where there's much better tech transfer, you still see a lot of bio people come to EF as a way of galvanizing their technology. So I think that from a European bio scene, you've got very strong technical talent that often doesn't have the strength of the academic institutions in terms of tech transfer that I think the US has. And so I think in that sense, Europe has an interesting feeding ground when it comes to finding co-founders and building biotech companies that's still developing. But there's other downsides that I'm sure we can address as well. 27 different markets is often the challenge that people leverage at Europe as an ecosystem. So, Timmy, what do you think about the trade-off?
Well, I think that good for a biotech company is very relative. I mean, there's a huge scope of application within biotechnology. From companies that are making glow-in-the-dark plants to companies that are developing cancer therapeutics. And the required investment is massively different, and the required skill set is also massively different. One thing that was encouraging as I was going on through this process was I discovered that the average age of a successful biotech co-founder is like 42, which is a bit older than me, and that's very different than like of another kind of like software company, right, or an app or something. And the reason is that you typically need to have a bit more experience to put together a biotech company. It's not universally true, but it's typically the case. And so in thinking about what is good for a biotech company and differences between the European ecosystem and the American one, in the US, there's more money sloshing around, I think. And there's a tendency to take these university spinouts. There are some venture funds that have startup labs that produce their own biotech companies. And so these things that have come out of the gates, big and running very fast, and the European biotech scene, I think, is a little bit less developed in that way. And you don't see companies coming out. I was following this other company out of Boston, which has got, I think they just raised like an 80 million Series A or something. The company's been around for 2 years, which is nuts. But it's because it's coming from one of these VC funds. And that is sort of more normal, I think, in the Cambridge, sort of Boston ecosystem than it is any place else. There is some nuance to that. There's some hubs in the UK where they do that kind of thing as well, but it is different. And so when thinking about what makes a good startup, a good biotech startup, I really do think that it's just like any other kind of startup. You got to have the right ingredients. You got to have the right team dimensions. You have to have the right sort of concept, the right kind of customer base. That's all the same. You know, the difference with biotech is that you're spending more time in a lab, and the time horizons are different, and the required investment is often different as well.
I think that those time horizons might also influence the age, because it's harder to have a company and have a successful exit in a very quick succession, right? It takes a long time for that product to be built in biotech relative to, let's say, a SaaS company or something like that, right, Timmy?
Yeah, but the valuations can be huge. You know, you look at the biotech exits, you know, and these companies are getting acquired for billions of dollars. And it's just a different game, you know, and, you know, salary expectations can be different in a biotech company. You're very often having to hire more experienced people that have MDs and PhDs. These people aren't going to work for 35 grand a year, you know, and so you need to think about that as you're putting this together, and what your budget looks like, and, you know, what the horizon is to exit. And then also, you know, IndieBio talked a lot about this concept of island hopping. You're going from funding round to funding round to funding round. I'm sure it was discussed in EF as well. And you really need to have some strategic vision about where you're going with this company and what kind of finance you're going to need once you get to Series A and B and C and whatever else. And in biotech, these can be really astronomical amounts.
Yes, absolutely. Before I pipe in with a little bit on that required investment, I would like to continue to encourage our audience to go ahead and ask your questions. We're happy to make sure those are answered by the end of the hour. But you're right, Timmy, that there is this extra emphasis on funding and capital that is required to have access to a lab and people with deep technical expertise. To that end, IndieBio New York does have a little bit of extra funds on top of that $250,000 for those that are in the therapeutics sector. It's not directly applicable to Timmy's company, unfortunately, but for those that have a therapeutic which will cost that much more to even get to the human trials, that's something that we at IndieBio recognize requires a greater capital expenditure. And now I kind of want to turn the tables and ask Timmy, this was something else that we were batting around, what it is that, having gone through two different programs, if you could go back in time to your pre-EF self, what is it that you wish that you could tell that person as he began his entrepreneurial journey? I like to eyeball. Is it? Can you pick just one thing, or I don't know if it's just, I don't know, a smattering of advice?
Yeah, I mean, there have been so many lessons learned in this process, you know, because it's a combination of being very, you know, circumspect in your choices and having some forethought, versus being very aggressive in just getting things done and going for it. Because you find, you know, you need both of those things, because if you're not out there doing stuff every day, the company's not going to progress. But if you're out there and you're recklessly making decisions, you're going to make a sloppy mess that you're going to have to live in and track back from. And undoing decisions is very challenging. We touched on this a bit when we were talking about the incorporation in France, then moving to the United States. I mean, I would conservatively say 100 hours, maybe, to get the company moved and to get the entity set up in the United States, you know, and some of that could have been avoided if, whenever we created the entity, we had just thought about it and sort of made an arrangement with EF and some others. But, you know, there's all sorts of things like that. I mean, I could talk to you for hours about the mistakes that we've made. But, you know, it's also just about like keeping your head on your shoulders and like having a vision for where this is going. And then, you know, no matter how many mistakes you make, you can get back on track and continue forward toward whatever that ultimate objective is.
That's really nicely said. And one of my favorite aphorisms is, it's easy to pass on knowledge and hard to pass on wisdom and experience. So it's easy to say those things and hard, unless you've lived it, to actually pass that on. We do have a number of questions that just came in, and I'm going to pass this one over to Jonny because it's about European investors and the interest in patents. The question is, do you find that European investors are more or less interested in patents held by biotech startups than US investors? And we know, just to lay the groundwork here, that there is an interest in demonstrating that you have protected your intellectual property among US investors. Jonny, when you are advising companies that have come out of EF, what is the general consensus?
I mean, exactly the same. If you're investing in a biotech, the fundamental thing you're investing in is the tech involved in the bio, I guess. So if that tech isn't locked up, and if you don't have a very solid and coherent patent and IP strategy, then of course, it makes it almost impossible to invest because that's your key asset. So yes, completely identical in that regard, and expect similar due diligence, similar patent checks, etc. And you will need to have a very strong, coherent narrative around your patent strategy, both today and for the future.
Wonderful. And Timmy, with your experience talking to both European and American investors, can you add some color to that?
Sorry, around the IP strategy or around?
Yes, yeah, well, on the IP strategy and on its value in speaking with investors.
Yeah, it's hugely important. Everybody asks about IP. What's something that we have learned that I didn't fully appreciate at the beginning of this journey is that IP is not just patents. IP is also trade secrets. It's also licensing arrangements. It's, as Jonny said, having a cohesive strategy for what this is going to look like. So if you don't have any patents now, what is the strategy for getting patents or building up a portfolio of trade secrets, or building up a portfolio of something that is useful to people that might want to buy you or put more money in, right? Patenting is a very complicated game. It doesn't always make sense to do it. There's geographic differences. It's very expensive. So you've got to be careful, and you have to have clarity of thought around that. And how we got that and are getting that, I think, is through a combination of talking to other startups that have worked in related fields, and also, constantly reaching out and speaking with IP attorneys. Both EF and IndieBio provided some priming for that. But we've had a number of very heavy sessions with these guys trying to figure out what the landscape looks like, doing freedom to operate studies, really getting enmeshed in the field so we can position ourselves strategically so investors can feel confident that their money is not going to be just thrown out the window.
Wonderful. The other thing, just to dovetail on that, Julie, quickly, just I think it's an important point that maybe is a bit non-obvious to a first-time biotech founder, certainly was to me when I was starting to advise biotechs, is that you don't actually want to patent everything, or you don't want to patent too much, because in effect, you're then telling someone exactly how you're doing that thing. So when we talk about patent strategy, it's not just about getting a patent, it's about how have you thought about what you're patenting, and actually how have you thought about what you're not going to patent, to Timmy's point about trade secrets, and how does that combination come together to have an effective patent strategy? Something that, I think is not necessarily obvious if you're not had to work in this field before.
Yeah, excellent. So 3 more questions, and then I'm afraid we're going to have to end. We will run a few minutes over because we started a few minutes late, so apologies again. One is really quick, the deadline for applying to IndieBio. The next IndieBio batch will run in February, so there are a few slots left. There's an application down below for those positions, so please get your applications in quickly if you're interested. And of course, we'll run another cohort at both New York and San Francisco again in the fall. This is a fun question that's for Timmy. Timmy, what advice would you give to a 21-year-old biotech CEO in the IndieBio program to bridge that experience gap you described and how to find mentors in this space? Any thoughts on this?
Yeah, there's advantages to that, right? I mean, we'll talk about the disadvantages first, is that, you sort of lack some of the credentials in the biotech space, and it really depends on the kind of company you're starting. But there were young co-founders in both EF and IndieBio, some of whom I'm quite good friends with that are like in your age bracket, and you can be like a smart 21-year-old that can get stuff done, and the energy that you bring to the space is certainly unique. And it's just about surrounding yourself with the right kinds of people, and making sure that you get good counsel and good advice, and also be aware of investors. I know there's two on the line, but investors are your friends, but they're also looking to make money, and they will do.
Oh, we lost Timmy, I think.
No, we did lose Timmy, but I think that maybe I have a couple thoughts on Timmy. We lost you for a second. Do you wanna finish your thought?
Sorry. Yeah, just as I was warning him against investors.
Yeah, kind of coincidental how that happened.
Yeah,
huh?
you're right. Exactly. Suddenly I'm just cut off. Exactly. No, I mean, I would say that, it's important just to keep your eyes open, and make sure that people don't take advantage of you, but also recognize that you got stuff to learn, and don't think that you can do this all on your own, and you're not going to like build a biotech company on Instagram and other social media. Right. So just, get smart people around you and, have them help you.
All right, I think that's great pieces of advice. And just to keep things on schedule, I want us to go round robin again, just like we did at the beginning, and talk about the factors that predict success of a founder entering the EF program, of a biotech company, from your experience and from watching others, Timmy, and from what we've experienced at IndieBio. And I'll kick things off here as you guys think about your answers. I think that the factors that predict the success are, it's kind of trite, but everything. You need to have good, but the two that are most important are a novel technology that's solving a true problem, right? Like you need to make sure that you are not just evolving. We don't like companies that are an evolution. We like those that are a revolution. And so make sure that you have the market and the technology that's going to tap into that market. And I would say the second is the founder. We look for a strong founder who we think is going to enact that revolution of a novel technology. Now I will pass that over to either Timmy or Jonny.
Well, I'll start by quoting, I think, Mike Tyson to revamp this theme, which is everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. I think founders, whether it's biotech or otherwise, have to be hugely resilient and resourceful. I think if you're looking to found in biotech, you have to be able to establish super strong technical credibility, as well as commercial credibility as a CEO. And as a CTO, I think it's critical, to Julie's point, that you're not so in love with your tech that you forget the market. So really, biotech is that perfect example of where, great technology has to meet great market. And both sides of the table, in terms of CEO and CTO or CSO, however you want to call it, have to have an understanding of the requirements of each other's roles, and be able to deliver that symbiotically and together. So you have to be able to build the technology in a commercially viable way for an exciting market in a disruptive space. You have to deliver that, and you both need to understand that from each other's point of view. So I think it's a kind of a bit deep tech 101, biotech 101. But I think that technical competency and credibility for biotech is really key. And then the last thing I think is, one of the things that biotech founders have the disadvantage of, and Timmy talked about island hopping earlier, versus say a SaaS founder, is a SaaS founder might have to think about how they get to seed and then think about how they get to Series A. A great biotech founder will probably know what their pathway is to Series A when we fund them, which is a pre-seed, and be able to talk that through from a financing, a roadmap, a validation, an IP point of view. So you really have to get into the details, because you're pretty much not going to have a product when you're going to ask for investment at the very early stages. And so you need to build a super strong conviction that you're going to be able to take it the distance, to get to the place where you've actually got the product and it's in the market, it's been tested, it's passed the trials, whatever else you need, and then it's going to become this amazing behemoth. So because you don't have that revenue proof point, how do you build credibility? It's in all the other things. So that's what I think you need to watch out for.
Wonderful. And Timmy?
Yeah, just add to that. The first is, again, it's not unique to biotech, but it's just grit. You got to get used to rejection from customers and investors and all sorts of people. I mean, we're constantly getting rejected from things. Applications, you'll get really good at applying for things too. We've just, I was telling these guys that, we just finished a 40-page due diligence document that we had to put together in a week for an investor. This kind of thing is not uncommon, and there's no guarantee we'll get this money, right? It's just, it's what you got to do to play the game. And the other, I would say, is, it's confidence in your technology and confidence in your technical skills. Biotech investors are smart. You go to these VCs, and these guys have MDs and PhDs and MBAs from the best schools in the world. A lot of them have been entrepreneurs themselves. They come from environments where they are taught to be highly critical. These are folks that are editors for the New England Journal of Medicine and Science and JAMA. And so you're going to get a lot of feedback, and it's not all going to be positive. And so you've got to be confident in your ability to interact with these folks, to be able to play at this level, to let them know that you have an opportunity that's worth investing in, that has the potential to really grow and become a successful biotech company.
Wonderfully said. Thank you so much. So we're at time, unfortunately, but it's been a lovely conversation. I'd like to thank everyone on who's joined us in this roundtable discussion. Thank you very much, Timmy, for taking time, especially after finishing that 40-page document. Really appreciate you talking about your experience with these programs and giving some insight from the founder perspective. And thank you very much, Jonny, for participating and being a great partner and helping entrepreneurs to gather and find their path. Would you like to add a couple of notes about the EF program and the upcoming application process?
Sure. So if you're looking to apply to Europe, so London, Paris, Berlin, or if you're looking to apply to North America to Toronto, applications are closing on the 14th of February, Valentine's Day. So maybe it will be love if you apply. Get your applications in before then. We will be reviewing them on a rolling basis, but deadline 14th of February to apply. Just head over to apply.joinef.com. Wish you all the best of luck. Feel free to connect with me as well. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter. Feel free to reach out and connect and say hi. Julie, thanks so much for moderating this, put it together. And Timmy, thanks as always for bringing your special blend of awesomeness. I appreciate it.
All right, so thank you to the audience, and thank you to our tech help, Josh Torrey. Thank you very much, appreciate it. If you're interested in applying to either of the programs that you've heard of, the application links are directly down below. IndieBio is accepting a couple more applications, so be sure to get them in quickly or apply for our fall cohorts. Look forward to seeing you next time.